Dear students, so welcome back to property law, and that would be HOE 6011. So we were looking at different aspects of property law, and last time we started off with servitudes, and so I sort of tried to explain in a very initial sense what are the different types of servitudes and what do these entail. So of course, these include easements, and they have dominant undertakings and servient undertakings, and there are a lot of different terms and terminologies involved over here. So I'll try to explain this particular lecture or this particular topic with the help of different legal systems. So we'll look at not only the French legal system and the Estonian legal system, but the legal systems of some other countries as well. And the whole idea is to impress upon you that property law is quite an old branch of the law studies, and this is because, well, property has been around for a very long time. It's somehow sort of the foundation of many modern societies, and all the progress, whatever you see, the plus sides, the minus sides, all of these are somehow linked to humanity's obsession with property and ownership and utilization of the same. So, well, enough of the small talk. Yeah, just to sort of remind you, homework 3 was up, homework 4 is up, yeah, and homework 4 has about 18 days or 17 days, depending on when you see it. And once this is done, I'll also put up homework 5. So, a bit hectic, but yeah, we are almost reaching towards the end now. Just a few more lectures from me, and then we have a sort of winding up sort of a situation where we go through whatever has been discussed and in all the lectures previously, and then that should sort of cover this course nicely. 3 credits over and done. All right. Now, of course, regarding homework 4, drafting a will, if you have any problems, any misunderstanding or anything, feel free to ask me. All right. This is not a group task. Don't sit down together and make 4 identical wills or something, because that's really silly. You don't have to do that. Okay, this is a simple task. You have all the situation, all the material in front of you. Just read it and come up with something that's good and reasonable and showcases your abilities as a young lawyer. Just don't copy, all right, because it sort of leads to a lot of unpleasantness um, all the way around, and for no rhyme or reason. Okay, so, well, when we look at servitudes, of course, affirmative use of land which is not owned or possessed by the person. And if you look at this situation, it would be similar to what you have with regard to utilities companies, telephone, sewage, cables, that sort of stuff. Then, of course, there are servitudes which allow landowners to restrict their neighbors' use of their own land, and this can be, for example, that you have this relationship. Very often, what happens is there's a big plot of land. All right, let's just try to sort of draw this and show it to you. So there is this big plot, yeah, really big, and let's say 2 hectares or 3 hectares. That would be how much? 2 hectares would be yeah, 22,400 square meters. So that's agricultural land or whatever. And now somebody decides to develop it, and so they develop it into let's say 4, 5, 6, 6 plots of land. So there's a plot land layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's a road in the middle. All right, and now this land piece which we saw earlier, which was comprising of just 2 hectares of a barren field, is now allotted for them for building houses or something. So this is very often what comes up, And in this situation, you may have a servitude which states that this will be only a residential area. So nobody can come here on the last plot and set up a horse stud farm or something, all right, or start keeping pigs over here, or chicken or turkey or something. No, it's all a property, living property. Everybody lives in a house here, so it's a housing estate in a way, and so that's a servitude in the sense that you cannot use it for non-residential purposes. And of course, in this also comes the whole aspect of these connections that are there, utilities, sewage, whatever, underground, overground, and stuff like that. Maybe mobile telephones is not such a problem, but then electricity would always be required. Maybe cable internet, yeah, because that's always very good, yeah, very good signals and stuff. So all of this would fit in over here. And then there are affirmative obligations also, which servitudes could be about. For example, you could have a situation here where everybody decides and agrees that you will have a security company. Well, see, so everybody pays, let's say the security company costs 300 euros a month, and then basically they set up alarms, and if you call or if that alarm is triggered, then a security car will come to inspect 24/7. And so that could be a situation, and in that case everybody pays 50 euros, and well, so that's also a sort of a servitude. And this could be with regard to security, or there could be an understanding that everybody would have standard fences. Yeah. Why? Well, you'll be surprised what happens when 6 different families get together. Or maybe there'll be this issue about planting very big tall trees as boundary hedges. For example, you may say that, well, you cannot have a tree that's taller than 3 meters, or so stuff like that. So all of these could be quite innocent, and of course you can see already over here how disputes can arise all the time. Somebody has an apple tree and it's growing into somebody else's land, or you have raspberry bushes, and half the raspberry bush is now growing on the other side. Or then you have pets or children running around, and so already you can have servitudes, you can have people causing all sorts of issues. There could be friction. Where do you park your car? Who owns this road? All sort of these things. So this is the sort of situation that arises with a servitude as a problem area. And well, basically most of these issues are best if they are resolved with written agreements, legal agreements, because then you won't have a problem. Because remember, these houses are built to at least last 100 years or something. Yeah. And so very often what you have is a family lives in the house for a few years and then they move out, or they have a bigger house or something and then they rent it out to some other people. So you always have this constant flux, infusion and diffusion of people. So the houses remain the same, just people come and go. And then of course you could have somebody who decides that they want to paint their house pink or yellow or black or something, and so of course that can cause issues with the others, because some people like to have a very similar outlook, and then some people like to stand out and be different. And you often come across such cases in the United States, in the UK especially. Somebody wants to paint their garage door bright yellow or put graffiti on the wall because they are artistic somehow, and then the other neighbors don't like that part. So very often, especially if it's a new development, you can see how the developer, the development company sort of tries to put in some order, and so a lot of these have to do with servitudes, what sort of things you can do or cannot do. And so of course there could be some restrictions. And the key aspect what I mentioned here was about the impact that these servitudes have on the successors, because remember, servitudes are not specific to you or me. I may be the owner of house A and you may be the owner of house B, or your client may be the owner. but it's not about you and me, right? So this servitude sort of ties up the land or the usage of the land or the house, and so it continues for several generations of owners and things like that. And so of course this could be for a particular individual or entity, it could be for a group of people, it could be something that envisages different relationships on different scales. And this is something that especially comes out a lot when you have independent houses and of course or row houses. Not so much so in flats, because then you are living in a house with lots of flats and everybody has their own say in this. But how the house sort of relates with other houses in the neighborhood. Now, you see there's a structure, and so of course there are some of these more broader issues that arise. And so of course public policy would indicate that these servitudes should cause distress or issues only to the bare minimum. All right, so it's only a matter of public policy, and so you shouldn't have servitudes that sort of overstep these boundaries. So if you look at Estonian Property Act, yeah, online, where you could check it out, and it has servitudes in place. Then there's a French Civil Code, and again, there are these different articles or sections that I've outlined. And then there's also something from India, so the Indian Easements Act from 1882. Interesting because it's sort of like this strange sort of a time capsule. It's when the British were the colonial power ruling in India, and so they brought this ideal of a European, but of course based on English common law sort of a system on easements, and again how to deal with property and things. So a bit of a mix and match from here and there. The reason being, you sort of get three different viewpoints, and it sort of helps you to understand how the more things change, the more similar they become. Yeah, it's really it's sort of an indication of human nature, how you may be in different countries and different cultures, but sort of property is always looked at in quite similar ways. So for the French, of course, there's a right of way, and that's the key aspect over here. And again, this is about getting access to the public highway or the public road. And the key element over here is that this has to be the shortest route and at the least damageable place for the person over whose property it is allowed. And so that would be here. So A is in this house, in this piece of land or parcel of land as it's called, and it's completely surrounded by the land of B. But of course there is a main road over here, and if A has to access B, then there's the easiest shortest way from here to here, yeah, and that sort of takes care of everything, hopefully without causing too much damage to B. So A cannot say he wants a long winding road all the way from here up to here. No, it has to be the shortest way so that B is inconvenienced as minimally as possible. And similarly, under the Estonian Property Act also, you have access to public road, and of course this is specified by agreement, but usually without an agreement then you have to go to court. And those of you who have been following Estonian jurisprudence lately, there have been a lot of these disputes about access to the road and stuff. Very often what happens is the developer buys 2 hectares and now makes up all of this division and subdivision and sells the plots, and people make their homes and everything, but the road remains a private road. Yeah, the developer keeps the ownership of the road and then starts charging individual house owners for using this road. And there have been some very comical situations coming up. The developer went bankrupt, and so this was in the 2000s, for example, or 2008, and then the assets of the developer are seized by the banks or the state, and then they're auctioned. And then there was some incident where some guy from Azerbaijan or somewhere or Georgia, and then he came and bought this road and then started charging a lot of money from the individual house owners for using this road. And so again, this causes a lot of friction. And lately, as I understand, the issue was clear cut, not a problem. Well, you go to the county level and get the permissions sorted out. Otherwise, you go to a court and court grants you all the permissions. But lately, there was an incident where somebody went to the Supreme Court and this matter went all the way up, and there were a lot of problems. And now it's still stuck because the court said that no, it's private property, and you can't just uh, treat it as your own personal way of doing things. So even though you are the house owners and you have the right to use this access road to get to the public road, it's not an unfettered right, and it's still nonetheless private property, and it still has to be respected. And then so there's a lot of this stuff that comes up, a lot of friction, and it really is getting more and more common. People have a €500,000 house, and still they don't have proper access to the road. Or where do you park your car? Yeah, because the private owner of this access road says, well, the road is only for driving through, it's not for parking. Yeah, yeah, so go park it in your garage or in your garden or wherever else. So you can see how all of these things cause a lot of friction. And the more you talk to house owners, the more people have problems. Somebody wanted to plant these tall, spruces on the edge, and then her neighbor came and complained that don't do that, because if these spruce trees grow tall, then they will cut the shade for her apple trees. And you're like, oh no, what the hell? So of course, and then the neighbor says your spruce should not be more than 100 centimeters tall, and but of course, you want privacy, so you want them to be 3 meters or 4 meters tall. So you always have a lot of these sort of issues that come up. Very often they are just silly issues that can be resolved because neighbors are always arguing and sometimes fighting, but then of course everybody lives together. That's human society. But then sometimes these things can really spiral out of control, especially if you have a tall tree and it's autumn time, and every time the leaves shed, and now your neighbor says cut your tree because all the leaves are coming into his property, and you are like, come on, it's such a nice tree, why do you want to cut it? So of course, all of these sort of things can cause a lot of stress issues. And then very often you have sometimes people who want to grow chickens in their backyard, or they like to have a lot of pets, so maybe 100 cats or something. So again, you see, a lot of this can cause a lot of friction. So, well, that's the Estonian Property Act as well. So there are different types of servitudes, and this is outlined in the French Civil Code, for example. And it's very interesting because, it sort of draws a distinction between a continuous servitude and a discontinuous servitude, or an apparent servitude or a non-apparent servitude. And all of these are important because very often, when you buy this house, you may not know where what is buried. Where's the telephone cable buried, or where is the water pipe, sewage pipe buried. And sometimes the worst scenario is you're trying to do some remodeling to your house, and then you hire some people and they dig, and then they end up damaging some fiber optic cable or something, and then this can be a huge issue. I had a professor from Montana, American retired judge, and he had told me once that he and his neighbor were doing some repair work on a farm, and how Montana is in the United States. It's like this last frontier near Yellowstone. And so they were doing some repair work, and they ended up hitting a cable, and it was not on any of their maps or anywhere, so they sort of had no idea that such a cable even existed. And then about 3 or 4 days later, they had some military vehicles coming over and people are asking questions, and it turned out that there was this top secret US military cable that connected from Montana to Alaska somehow, through Canadian territory or something. And this was a part of their the United States Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Security Defense Shield, and this particular cable supplied electric power to one of the radar substations, and apparently they ended up damaging it. Now, who's to blame over here? I mean, this is secret information. It's not there on the maps or something. But very often, I mean, this is very dramatic, but less dramatic could be, you're just doing some repair work, adding some paver blocks, or you want to plant an apple tree and then you damage some cable. And then it turns out that this is a utility cable, and of course, it can cost you a lot of money to get it replaced. This is not something that you can just tie up with a sellotape or a scotch tape or something, or an electric tape or a gorilla tape or something. But this is, this can be very expensive to replace. So these are relevant over here. And of course, there will also be this homework 5, which sorry, homework 5 is different. In fact, there's the septic tank case. So I'll show you that thing over here. Let me see, septic tank case. So of course, well, that can then sort of be made visible. I thought I used to have earlier some other homeworks, but now I have changed them. So let's see here. Let me make it available again. So there is this septic tank case, and again, very interesting because it deals with these sort of issues regarding what sort of servitudes are possible without the need of a person to be present, or which have to have a person to be present, and then which can show themselves by outer works or signs, or which are hidden, and so they are not readily visible or apparent. and so when you look at establishments of servitudes, now this is an interesting area. This was a very simplistic situation. Somebody buys a field, develops it, and starts off with a blank slate, and so everything is okay and under control, and you can sort of regulate who does what and controls how much and who has to bear with what. But sometimes that's not the case. It could be that this was done 40 years ago, and so or it's an older place, maybe in the countryside, so 80 years ago or something. And so let's say this is a development that's around a lake, and I have many friends in Finland who have cottages and cabins next to lakes. That's in the interior of Finland, for example, and the same goes even in Estonia. So you just have a sauna, maya, or a little house and a country cottage and stuff. And a lot of these can be problematic because this is not subject to any legal agreements or anything, but it's just that this is how people have been accessing this particular neighborhood or this particular house for the last 100 years or something. And then so in that situation, you could have this law requirement which states that access, or the right to a view or the right to light or something like that is sort of guaranteed if it's been going on for 20 years, 30 years in the past in a continuous manner, or through an agreement in writing. So of course, it's always best to have something in writing, but if it's an older sort of an arrangement, then it may not be always feasible to show that you have an agreement which says that 100 years ago this right was granted or something. And as you know, with many laws and legal systems, the whole idea is to have something which is ready and usable and solves the most amount of problems with the least amount of trouble. So that's how laws often tend to be. So well, although of course there are some issues with prescription as a legal remedy, and so you can see that in Estonian Property Act section 173 as well. So there are always these checks and balances. All right. And then of course, just as you can create a servitude through a period of usage over a period of time, or through a legal agreement, you can also extinguish a servitude. And then of course, how would that arise? Let's say this farm A has been around for 100 years, and you have been given the right to use it to go through B's land to go to the road. Now, what happens if the owner A of the house sells the land to B? Yeah. So you see, this can now cause a situation where both pieces of land are owned by the same person. So now, why do you need a servitude? There's no need of a servitude because A has merged into B, and now these are not two separate pieces of land, but this is rather one big block of land. And so when this happens, of course, the servitude gets extinguished, and so that's over here. Or if you don't use it for a continuous period of time, could be 20 years, 30 years, whatever the law stipulates. And so that's how sometimes these things can happen. And now, of course, this brings in different issues like the law of limitation, and when does this 25-30 year period begin to start from, and what are the differences for different types of servitudes and things like that. So these often come up a lot, and we have to be careful about them. So servitudes, they are affirmative or they could be negative. And affirmative is in this context, well, it sort of explains the difference between a servitude and an easement. And although they are quite similar, very often the two concepts can be quite different. And so an easement refers to the dominant estate, so an easement is always an interest in the land in the possession of another, and so it sort of has this sort of legal definition that has to be followed. And so an easement usually is a right of use over the property of another. And this is different from a servient servitude, because in a servitude you have a servient estate and a dominant estate, and the property given usage is the servient estate, and then the other is dominant estate. And so again, just have to be careful about the difference between a servitude and an easement, and again, very subtle small differences, but from a legal viewpoint these are important and should be kept in mind. And how are easements created? Well, contractual, so that would be law of obligation, or by a will, for example, and even by implication. So again, interesting viewpoint of different issues. And also under English law, you can have an individual's use that is recognized. Now, why would this be relevant? For example, if I'm not mistaken, in some countries, like for example Estonia, also I believe, let's say you own a big piece of land or a forest or something, how do people know that it is your land? So I believe the law stipulates that you should have a boundary that is marked, and you should state clearly over there that this is private property. Otherwise, if it's not marked, then maybe somebody could come and walk by, or have a campsite, or just rest over there, and you can't really stop them because you haven't indicated where your private property begins from. And then of course you have to be careful, because if you don't pay attention, then today one person comes, tomorrow 4 people come, and then soon people start thinking that this is a regular way to go to access a beach or a lake or something. And then if time passes and you don't do much about this, then later you cannot try to stop people from accessing these other public places like a lake or a beach or something by going through your property. So and of course termination is also explained over here, and it's quite similar to what we had seen in the past. So then there is this issue regarding the underground septic system, and this is what I was talking about. So there's this case law as well, and it's quite interesting because well, it's the Diner versus Rattray septic tank case, and basically let's look at this for example again. So A has a house, yeah, and then of course B has this piece of land. Now basically what happened was that, well, maybe I could draw something new and try to explain this case to you, because it's quite interesting in the sense that this is the piece of land, a big piece of land, and so somebody had a house over here, and then a septic tank that goes over here. I don't know if you know what a septic tank is. Well, if you don't live in the city, then and you live in the countryside, then this is your toilet and the toilet seat, and so you sit here, yeah, and I don't know, watch your mobile phone, or something, yeah. So that's you, okay. And well, now this has to go somewhere, and usually what happens is either it can just go straight down into a hole and then you have to clear it out, or if you are a bit more civilized, then it goes to what is known as a septic tank system. And so basically it's like this. All right, this is of course underground. So this is all underground here, and this is your house or something. All right, so whatever you poop goes here and then sort of collects here and then goes into the other compartment and then the other one and sort of stays here, and then whatever gases are created, of course, go out from the pipe, and so the gas comes out, moisture level comes out, and then once a year you call this big gigantic poop truck, and what they have is a vacuum, and so they put the pipe into the system, and then they sort of suck out whatever has collected and solidified over here in a way. And then of course this is sort of is how the septic tank system works. And then this is very common if you live in the countryside outside regular sewage lines. And I know looks a bit weird, but actually it's quite straightforward. And if properly installed, it gives you very good service. And well, nothing much can go wrong here. And of course, you could always use biological soap or something, and then that's good for the environment, good for the bacteria. Actually, even is very good fertilizer. But nowadays people don't just take it and put it into the flower beds or something. That's a bit too weird. So rather it gets taken by the sewage truck, and then they dump it into specified places, and so that's how this goes. So this is back to this person. He had this big piece of land, he had the house, and he had a septic tank. Yeah. And now what he decides to do is he decides to sell it, but it's of course a very big piece of land. So he sort of makes it half. Yeah. Sells this to one person and this to another person. And well, yeah, so okay, that's it. It's an old house, and this person checks it out and likes the house for whatever reason. Well, of course, it's got a toilet, but where does the toilet waste go? No idea. Nobody cares, of course, because it's not visible, and nothing is apparent in that sense. And then of course, the person who has this house decides to turn it into a restaurant. Yeah. And now there's an issue here, of course. If you're just a one single person or a small family living in a house, how much can you poop? How much can you pee? There are limitations to what person can do at an individual level. But if you have a restaurant here, now you're talking about maybe 100, 200 clients a day. And if it's a bar and you're selling beer, then of course, the more beer a person drinks, the more is the need to go to the toilet. And so when that started, then of course all of this accumulated here, and then sort of became a little lake. And so the owner of this part was like, what the hell, what's this yellow stuff coming out of the ground? Well, of course, it's all over blocked and choking, and so everything out in the open. And so this is how the dispute started. And then you can of course read, there are some questions out over here. Now this depends on what sort of a servitude are we looking at, and what are the consequences of that. And the case that you see also over here, it's an American case, but again very interesting. gives you an overview. The question here is who's responsible. All right, and this is also related with due diligence. You buy a piece of land, well, should you know or care about what's under the land, what is apparent, what's not apparent? Can you come later on and say, well, I had no idea? Well, you can't just spend your money and not have a clue about what is all around, which is why when you are going in for a legal transaction regarding land, you should sort of hire a lawyer, or at least spend some time trying to understand the various aspects about this, because this is how this was never a problem earlier, but because the original owner has divided this into two pieces and now sold it to two separate people, and of course because of the creation of a bar, you have a real serious problem here. And the Estonian Property Act, for example, indicates that an increase in the needs of the dominant immovable can have sort of consequences, and just because this was a house, this was a septic tank, it was okay, but if now this is a bar or restaurant, it's not okay anymore. So these are the sort of issues that are dealt with and looked at in detail. So for today, well, we have sort of looked at some of these cases and try to understand the affirmative rights of servitudes, and you also have to read this septic tank case to get an idea about servitudes and the serious problems that can come up with apparent or non-apparent servitudes. The next time I'll be looking at issues dealing with sunlight and light, and these can be also very interesting aspects because of nowadays it's very popular to have photovoltaic solar cells in the garden or on the roof or next to the window, and you're trying to be green and economical at the same time. And then of course, well, what happens if your neighbor's tree grows very tall, or your neighbor adds an extra floor, and now your right to sunshine is affected? And those of us who live in northern parts, Estonia, Finland, we know how sunshine is a treasured resource because it's so rare, and so it's very upsetting if you have a window and you have access to sunshine while you're having a morning cup of coffee, and now somebody blocks your right to the light. This can be even worse than your right to a view. So of course, these are again some of the very commonplace legal issues that arise, and we'll talk about them next time in the context of negative rights, and especially when they deal with sunshine and things like that. So for today, we restrict ourselves to septic tank issues, and well, this is it for today. And so thank you for your time, and make sure that you do all your homework assignments on time and upload them on time as well. And well, until next time, have a good weekend. Goodbye.